Stephen Reed is president of Sutton Reed, a political and communication strategy firm, and was paid to consult several winning and losing campaigns this last time around. And longtime political consultant Susan Adler-Thorpe is with us with Thorpe Communications, who's been known to also advise with some local campaigns. So, Stephen, I want to start with you in this conversation. We'll show the results from the district attorney's race. You were with the Wyrick campaign, and I'm just curious to get your perspective now that it's over. I always thought the conventional wisdom was Amy Wyrick was going to squeak this out. It might be close, but she was going to win it. And then it seemed like the tide kind of turned 2 or 3 weeks out. Do you have the same perspective, or do you feel like the cake was baked before the things even got going in this race?
Well, I think the cake was baked to a large degree depending on Republican turnout, and Republicans just did not choose to turn out this election cycle. Now, even with the best case scenario of Republicans turning out, that's about 43%. And it looks like they turned out at about 36%. So Amy made up about 8% of her points from Democrats, meaning she got about 16% of the Democratic vote. If I was going by polling data that I saw, she probably picked up about 20% of the African-American vote and about 11% of what we would be called white Democrats, and then held probably 95% of the Republican vote. So for her to have had a chance, the Republicans would have needed to turn out about 42, 43% to get her over the 50% threshold. And that's just becoming harder to get to that number for Republicans every year.
And Stephen, let me ask you, you know, we talked earlier during the campaign, and I thought, and I think you thought as well, that the radio commercial that you all did with Deborah Marion, the mother of Lorenzen Wright, endorsing Amy Wyrick, was going to give you much more of a bump than probably it did. What is your view on how effective that ad was in the long run, and did it accomplish as much as you wanted it to accomplish?
So I think the ad was very effective from the standpoint of that Amy was able to hold on to a considerable amount of African-American vote, even though she had an R beside her name, which is very, very difficult to do. And as you can see by some of the other results, not many other candidates that had an R beside their name were able to do that. But I don't think it's realistic to believe, with the exception of few scenarios, that you're going to be able to peel off 30%, 25 or 30% of that vote ever, particularly in a year where people have all gone into their corners. Well, I say a year, really the past 4 or 5 years, ever since Trump became president. People have really polarized into the D and R columns. So it's very, very difficult to get people to change their minds. And if there was any wrinkle thrown into that, I would say the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade just sent everybody right back to their corners again.
So let's talk about 2 offices then on the judicial side of this countywide election that are changing. Democrats winning both the DA's race with Steve Mulroy, the new DA, effective September 1st, and Tarek Sugarman will be the new juvenile court judge. And there's a lot of concern, apparently, especially among the rank and file, the Memphis Police Department, about what this means overall for law enforcement in Shelby County. In fact, the program Behind the Headlines, or Beyond the Headlines on WKNO, had Police Chief C.J. Davis on, and she acknowledged that there is some concern. In fact, we have a quote to share with you. She said, "I think it's quite natural for them to be concerned," talking about the rank and file. "Sometimes elections have a tendency to put the most negative commentary out, but we have worked internally to communicate with officers that we have a job to do. We don't want to get too distracted about what could or might possibly happen." And then she goes on to say, "What we are concerned about more than anything is the increase in the number of calls we get and the 20% of the people who have committed 80% of the crimes." So, Susan, I thought that was interesting, that there is this perspective, at least among the people we're asking to keep us safe, that they're concerned what these 2 changes and these 2 new positions means for law enforcement in Shelby County.
Well, I think the people in law enforcement are dedicated people in the world of law enforcement, and it's tough. It's really tough to police our streets these days. But the people in law enforcement also are humans, just like all of us. And change honestly is difficult, because what you're doing is you're trading a certainty for possibility. And especially in an era where we see crime on the rise, juvenile crime on the rise, you know, it is kind of disconcerting to think that coming into office are two people who campaigned saying that that Amy Wyrick and Dan Michael were too tough on criminals. Well, you know, they also campaigned that crime is on the rise. So we just have to give them a chance to see how they plan to bring that crime down. Remember, they got elected on a campaign, not on what they have done in office. So I think you need to give them a chance. I think that they too are going to be governed by rules and laws, and by criminal offenses. I mean, especially in juvenile court, when you bring in, I think they litigate 50,000 cases a year. But I think when they bring in young juveniles who have been charged by law enforcement with crimes such as assault or murder or rape or other such terrible crimes, then I don't think that Judge Sugarman is going to have much of a choice, and he's not going to be wanting to send them back out on the street, but he's also going to have to listen to the prosecutors who are coming in from Steve Mulroy's office. So it's going to be an interesting set of circumstances.
Let me have you the final word on that, because you can understand where the concern is coming from. I mean, Steve Mulroy took great offense to be branded as somebody who is in favor of defunding the police, but nonetheless, he is more of a criminal justice reformer, as will Judge Sugarman be when he takes the oath of office come September 1st. And it's kind of an experiment, really, what it's going to mean.
Well, it is, and I think Susan made a good point here. You know, we're talking about pretty drastic change here, Richard. Drastic change in the DA's office, drastic change in the juvenile court operations, which really hadn't changed all that much in many decades. So yes, there's some trepidation here by some officers. I do understand that. I think they think that some of them at least think that there may be a little bit more liberal attitude about how to prosecute cases, what cases you go after, what will be the priorities, and whether those things will help or hurt the actual police enforcement that's going on in this community. So we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, you know, the voters have spoken here. These are two capable people who are coming into office. As Susan says, let's give them a chance and see how this works. I think it'll be fine. Okay, I could keep this going, but I do need we're running heavy on this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Memphis mayor's race. Now that we know that term limits will not be extended and Strickland's out when his term is up, who are some of the names who might run for mayor to replace him? We'll talk about that in just a moment.